Hi guys, tonight we're exploring one of the most haunting scenarios imaginable. What if you woke up tomorrow morning to discover that everyone else on Earth had simply vanished? 8 billion people gone overnight, leaving you as the sole survivor in a world that was built for billions but now houses only one. If you enjoy these post-apocalyptic sleep stories that explore isolation and survival, hit that like button and subscribe for more. And drop a comment letting me know what time it is where you are and where you're listening from. I always love hearing from fellow late-night contemplators worldwide. Alright, let's begin. The alarm clock screams its familiar electronic shriek at 6:30 in the morning, just as it has every day for the past 3 years. You reach across the nightstand with practiced muscle memory, fingers finding the snooze button in the darkness. But something feels different. The background hum of civilization that normally seeps through your bedroom walls is absent. No distant traffic rumble from the interstate that carries 47,000 vehicles past your neighborhood each day. No neighbor's dog barking at joggers. No garbage truck hydraulics groaning through their weekly ballet of collection. Just silence. Profound and absolute. You stumble toward the kitchen, expecting to hear the familiar sounds of morning news drifting from apartments above and below. The building that houses 236 residents across 14 floors should be alive with the sounds of coffee makers gurgling, showers running, and children being hurried towards school buses. Instead, your footsteps echo with an unfamiliar hollowness, as if the very air has become thinner, more responsive to sound. The coffee maker sits dark and silent. You press the power button and nothing happens. The digital display that usually glows with cheerful green numbers remains black. You flip the light switch. Nothing. The electricity that normally flows through 567 miles of power lines serving your city has simply stopped. Walking to the window, you expect to see the usual parade of commuters heading toward the metropolitan area that employs 843,000 people across 42 square miles of urban landscape. The street below is empty, not the temporary emptiness of early morning or late night, but something deeper. Cars sit abandoned at odd angles, as if their drivers simply vanished mid-journey. A silver sedan rests halfway through an intersection, its door hanging open like a mouth frozen mid-scream. The traffic light above cycles through its eternal sequence of red, yellow and green, powered by emergency batteries that will continue their mechanical duty for another 72 hours before surrendering to darkness. Your phone shows no signal. The cellular towers that normally handle 2.6 million calls per hour across your metropolitan region have become silent monoliths, their red warning lights still blinking against the dawn sky but carrying no voices, no data, no connection to the world that existed when you went to sleep. The internet backbone that carries 4.7 terabytes of data per second through fiber optic cables buried beneath your city has become a vast neural network without thoughts to transmit. You step outside, and the air itself feels different. The constant background concentration of carbon dioxide that human activity pumps into the atmosphere at a rate of 36.7 billion tons annually has already begun its slow decline. The invisible chemical signature of 8 billion human lives breathing, driving, burning and creating has started to fade like a scent dissipating in an empty room. Walking down the main street of your neighborhood, the absence of life becomes overwhelming. The grocery store where you bought dinner supplies just yesterday sits with its automatic doors frozen half open, bags of groceries scattered across the parking lot where they fell from hands that simply ceased to exist. The store's refrigeration systems, designed to preserve 43,000 pounds of perishable food, have already begun to fail. Without the electrical grid that normally delivers 1.4 million megawatt hours per day to your region, temperatures inside the freezers are climbing toward the threshold where bacteria will begin their feast. The elementary school playground equipment sits motionless, swings hanging straight and still in the morning air. This facility served 627 children between ages 5 and 11. Children who yesterday filled these spaces with laughter and motion. Their absence feels like a physical weight, as if gravity itself has intensified in response to the silence. The American flag above the school hangs limp against its pole, no longer watched by the eyes of teachers who pledge to nurture the next generation through 8,000 instructional hours per academic year. As you walk further from your neighborhood, the scope of emptiness expands like ripples in a pond. The regional hospital that employed 2,300 medical professionals sits dark and quiet. Its emergency room, which typically handled 97 patient visits per day, contains only the ghostly presence of medical equipment that will never again monitor heartbeats, blood pressure, or brain activity. The intensive care unit, where ventilators once breathed for patients unable to breathe for themselves at a rate of 12 breaths per minute, has become a monument to technology without purpose. The city's water treatment plant continues its mechanical processes, driven by backup generators that hold enough fuel for 96 hours of operation. 700,000 gallons per hour flow through filtration systems designed to serve a population that no longer exists. The chlorine levels that once protected drinking water from bacterial contamination now sanitize liquid that flows to empty buildings through pipes that will gradually lose pressure as pumping stations fail one by one across the municipal system that spans 437 miles of underground infrastructure. At the airport, massive jets sit stranded on runways like beached whales. Flight schedules that once coordinated the movement of 120,000 passengers daily through this hub have become meaningless. The control tower's radar systems continue their automatic sweeps, searching for aircraft that will never arrive. Fuel trucks containing 800,000 gallons of jet fuel sit abandoned beside planes that were being prepared for journeys to destinations now empty of anyone to receive them. The absence of human activity creates cascading effects that ripple outward from every corner of civilization. Nuclear power plants that once supplied 18% of the region's electrical needs have begun their emergency shutdown protocols, but these systems were designed assuming human oversight. The spent fuel cooling pools require constant water circulation to prevent meltdown, and backup generators hold only enough diesel fuel for 7 days of autonomous operation. Without human intervention, these facilities face a timeline that counts not in years or months, but in hours and days. Agricultural regions surrounding the metropolitan area tell their own story of abandonment. Dairy farms that housed 15,000 cattle across 63 operations have become scenes of increasing desperation. Automated milking systems have fallen silent, leaving animals that normally produce 6.7 gallons of milk per day in growing discomfort. Feed distribution systems designed to deliver precisely calculated nutritional requirements to each animal have stopped, creating a crisis that will resolve itself in matters of days through starvation. The grain elevators that stored 2.3 million bushels of corn and soybeans stand as monuments to a harvest that will never be consumed by the human population it was intended to feed. These facilities, each rising 130 feet into the prairie sky, contain enough stored energy to feed thousands of people for months. But the complex logistics of grain processing, transportation, and distribution have been severed at every link in the chain. Interstate highways stretch like abandoned rivers across landscapes that yesterday pulsed with commerce and travel. The American interstate system, comprising 47,000 miles of roadway, carried 4.4 trillion vehicle miles of travel annually. Now these ribbons of concrete and asphalt serve only as monuments to motion, marked by vehicles that sit where their drivers vanished. Semi-trucks carrying everything from electronics to food products have become stationary museums of commerce, their cargo slowly spoiling or depreciating in value within economies that no longer exist. Weather systems continue their eternal patterns, indifferent to the absence of human observation. Hurricane season approaches the Gulf Coast, where cities once prepared with evacuation plans designed to move 2.1 million residents to safety. Storm surge models that factored in population density, traffic capacity, and shelter availability have become academic exercises. The National Weather Service's Doppler radar systems continue their automated scans, sending warnings to emergency broadcast networks that reach no receivers, no listeners, no one capable of taking protective action. In the financial districts of major cities, electronic trading systems continue their programmed activities for several hours before failing. The global economy that moved $24 trillion in daily foreign exchange transactions has collapsed not through market forces or political upheaval, but through the simple absence of human participation. Bank vaults containing $740 billion in physical currency sit locked and purposeless, their security system still active but protecting wealth that has lost all meaning. Manufacturing facilities that once produced everything from automobiles to smartphones have fallen silent. An automotive assembly plant that typically completed 96 vehicles per 8-hour shift sits frozen mid-production, robotic arms positioned over partially assembled cars that will never feel human touch. The facility's inventory of steel, aluminum, and rare earth elements represents millions of dollars in raw materials that will slowly degrade without the human intelligence needed to transform them into finished products. The absence of human maintenance becomes critical within days. Sewage treatment plants that normally process 53 million gallons of wastewater daily begin to fail as pumping stations lose power and biological treatment systems collapse without careful monitoring. The infrastructure that invisible carries away the waste products of modern civilization was designed with human oversight as a fundamental assumption. Without constant adjustment of chemical levels, monitoring of bacterial cultures, and mechanical maintenance, these systems face catastrophic failure within 72 hours. Ocean-going vessels present their own unique tragedy. Container ships carrying 24,000 shipping containers drift powerless on shipping lanes that once carried 90% of global trade. These floating cities, some longer than 3 football fields and capable of carrying cargo worth $200 million, have become ghost ships sailing predetermined routes toward ports that will never receive them. Their automated navigation systems continue broadcasting position reports to satellite networks that still function, creating electronic phantoms of vessels without purpose. Livestock populations face immediate crisis across agricultural regions. Poultry operations housing 15 million chickens in climate-controlled buildings lose environmental systems within hours of power failure. The precise temperature and humidity controls that maintained optimal conditions for egg production at rates of 300 eggs per hen annually become death chambers as ventilation fails. Beef cattle operations that managed 120,000 head across concentrated feeding lots face water shortages as automatic distribution systems fail and stored feed becomes inaccessible. The pet population of domestic animals creates its own heartbreaking scenario. 78 million dogs and 85 million cats that depend entirely on human care for survival find themselves trapped in homes, apartments, and shelters. Pet food manufacturing facilities that produced $4.7 billion worth of nutritional products annually sit idle, their production lines frozen mid-operation. Veterinary clinics equipped to provide medical care for the 42% of households that owned at least one pet become monuments to the human-animal bond that once defined domestic life. Urban wildlife populations initially benefit from the sudden absence of human activity. City parks that normally hosted 3.2 million visitors annually become havens where deer, rabbits, and smaller mammals venture into areas previously dominated by human presence. However, these same animals face new challenges as the human systems that inadvertently supported urban ecosystems collapse. Garbage production that once provided food sources for urban scavengers drops to zero, creating a shift in food webs that have adapted to human presence over decades. Water reservoirs that supply major metropolitan areas continue to hold their precious contents, but without human management, these resources face gradual contamination and depletion. A reservoir system serving 2 million residents contains approximately 40 billion gallons of treated water, representing enough supply for normal consumption over 180 days. However, the complex network of pumping stations, treatment facilities, and distribution systems requires constant maintenance and adjustment that only human expertise can provide. Forest fire suppression systems lose their human operators just as summer fire season approaches regions that typically experience 400 wildland fires annually. Detection networks that once enabled rapid response to fires smaller than 10 acres will continue to function on battery power for weeks, but without firefighting crews, aircraft, and strategic coordination, fires will burn according to natural patterns not seen in inhabited regions for over a century. The accumulation of forest undergrowth that human management has attempted to control through prescribed burns and mechanical clearing becomes fuel for fires that will reshape entire ecosystems. Agricultural pest populations face disruption of the chemical controls that modern farming applies at rates of 2.5 billion pounds of pesticides annually across American cropland. Without human intervention, insect populations that were held in check by systematic spraying programs begin to recover to natural levels. Crop fields that represent investments of thousands of dollars per acre in seed, fertilizer, and cultivation face insect pressure that will determine which plant species survive in landscapes no longer managed for human food production. Zoo and aquarium facilities present particularly poignant scenarios of abandonment. These institutions, which collectively housed over 700,000 individual animals, representing 4,000 species, maintained complex life support systems requiring constant human monitoring. Marine mammals that depended on water filtration systems processing thousands of gallons per hour face rapidly deteriorating conditions. Elephants that consume 600 pounds of food daily find their specialized diets unavailable as food preparation facilities lose power and human caregivers disappear. The electrical grid itself represents one of humanity's most complex achievements, connecting power generation facilities across thousands of miles through transmission lines carrying 750,000 volts. This network balanced supply and demand in real time through human oversight and computerized controls that responded to consumption patterns involving millions of individual users. Without human management, the grid experiences cascading failures as individual components shut down in response to load imbalances that no longer have operators available to correct them. Transportation fuel supplies begin their own countdown toward uselessness. Gasoline stored at distribution terminals and retail stations represents approximately 21 days of normal consumption, but without electricity to power fuel pumps, this energy source becomes inaccessible to the vehicles that might need it. Refineries that processed 15 million barrels of crude oil daily shut down automatically when their complex control systems detect abnormal conditions that would normally trigger immediate human intervention. Medical research facilities conducting critical studies on diseases affecting millions of people worldwide face the loss of years of scientific progress. Laboratory freezers containing cell cultures, tissue samples, and experimental compounds that represented investments of billions of dollars in research lose their temperature controls within hours of power failure. Clinical trials that tracked patient responses to promising new treatments for cancer, Alzheimer's disease, and other conditions become meaningless as both researchers and patients vanish simultaneously. The International Space Station, orbiting 254 miles above Earth, continues its trajectory, carrying automated systems designed to support human life in the vacuum of space. Solar panels generating 25 kilowatts of power continue to function, but the station's life support systems were calibrated for human occupants who will never return. Mission control centers in Houston, Moscow, and Munich that once provided 24-hour monitoring and communication support have fallen silent, leaving humanity's greatest technological achievement to orbit an empty world. Seed banks that preserve genetic diversity for future crop development contain samples representing 87,000 plant varieties stored at negative 18 degrees Celsius. These repositories of biological heritage depend on mechanical refrigeration systems requiring constant electrical power and human monitoring. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault, often called the Doomsday Vault, was designed to preserve crop diversity against global catastrophes, but its systems assumed that humans would remain available to maintain the technology that protects seeds against temperature fluctuations that could destroy genetic material accumulated over decades. Ocean ecosystems begin to show subtle changes as the massive global fishing industry that harvested 94 million tons of fish annually ceases all operations. Fish populations that were managed through international quotas and seasonal restrictions face the absence of human predation for the first time in centuries. Commercial fishing vessels representing $30 billion in capital investment drift powerless on fishing grounds that will begin to recover according to natural population dynamics rather than human management strategies. Telecommunications satellites orbiting 22,000 miles above Earth continue broadcasting signals to ground stations that no longer have human operators to receive them. The constellation of 2,000 active satellites that enabled global communications, weather monitoring, and navigation services represents hundreds of billions of dollars in technology that continues functioning automatically. However, without ground-based maintenance and periodic orbital adjustments, these systems begin a gradual decline that will render them useless within months or years. Urban rat and cockroach populations that thrived in environments created by human food waste and shelter face sudden changes in their resource base. These adaptable species that evolved alongside human civilization find themselves in cities that no longer produce the 46 million tons of food waste that American urban areas generated annually. The ecosystems that developed in sewers, subway systems, and building foundations begin shifting toward whatever natural food sources remain available without human activity. The absence of air traffic controllers leaves commercial aviation in immediate crisis. Aircraft in flight at the moment of human disappearance face fuel exhaustion over airports that cannot provide landing guidance or ground support. The global air traffic control system that coordinated 43 million flights annually depended on human decision-making to resolve conflicts, adjust routes for weather, and manage the complex choreography of aircraft moving at 500 miles per hour through shared airspace. Chemical manufacturing facilities that produce everything from pharmaceuticals to plastics begin automatic shutdown procedures designed to prevent accidents during unplanned outages. However, these systems assumed that human operators would return within hours to resume normal operations. Reactors containing partially completed chemical processes begin to cool or overheat beyond their designed parameters, creating conditions that were never anticipated by safety engineers who assumed human intervention would always be available. Agricultural irrigation systems that deliver water to 22 million acres of cropland lose their human managers just as growing seasons reach critical phases requiring precise water management. Center pivot irrigation systems that normally deliver exactly calculated amounts of water to maximize crop yields sit motionless in fields where plants will either receive too much water from natural rainfall or face drought conditions that human management previously prevented. The Global Positioning System constellation that provides navigation data to billions of devices continues broadcasting atomic clock signals accurate to within 38 nanoseconds. However, the ground control facilities that maintain these satellites and correct for orbital decay require human operators to upload navigation data updates. Without these corrections, GPS accuracy degrades over time, eventually making the system useless for the precision navigation that modern transportation and logistics systems require. Emergency services infrastructure designed to respond to crises affecting millions of people sits ready but unmanned. Fire stations housing equipment worth millions of dollars contain trucks capable of pumping 1,500 gallons of water per minute, but without firefighters to operate them, these resources become monuments to human preparedness. Ambulances equipped with life support systems that could save lives remain parked in stations throughout metropolitan areas that once responded to over 600 emergency calls daily. The psychological weight of complete solitude would be overwhelming beyond anything humans have evolved to handle. Homo sapiens developed as social creatures over 300,000 years of evolution, with brain structures specifically adapted for group living, communication, and cooperation. The absence of human contact creates sensory deprivation more profound than any isolation experiment ever conducted. Previous studies of extreme isolation involved individuals who knew that human contact would eventually return, but complete global solitude represents a psychological condition without precedent in human experience. Days pass, and the infrastructure that once supported 8 billion human lives begins its inevitable decay. Backup power systems exhaust their fuel supplies. Water pressure drops as pumping stations fail. The complex supply chains that delivered fresh food to urban areas become meaningless without human participation at every level, from production through consumption. The planet Earth continues its orbit around the Sun, but the thin layer of human civilization that once covered its surface has become archaeology waiting to be discovered by investigators who will never come. Your own survival depends on rapidly acquiring skills that most modern humans never needed to develop. Finding potable water, locating food sources that don't require complex preparation, and maintaining shelter without electrical systems become immediate priorities. The abundant resources of modern civilization remain physically present, but increasingly inaccessible, without the human knowledge and cooperation required to harvest, process, and distribute them effectively. Walking through empty cities, you witness the gradual reclamation of urban space by natural processes that human activity once held at bay. Weeds push through sidewalk cracks at growth rates no longer constrained by foot traffic and maintenance crews. Small animals venture into areas previously dominated by human activity, beginning ecological succession that will transform urban landscapes over decades and centuries. The silence itself becomes a presence, filling spaces that once vibrated with human voices, mechanical sounds, and the constant low-frequency hum of electrical systems. This absence of sound creates an acoustic environment unlike anything experienced by humans since before the Industrial Revolution. The Earth's natural soundscape emerges gradually as human noise pollution fades, revealing bird songs, wind patterns, and other audio signatures that urban environments had masked for generations. In this scenario of complete human absence, you become not just the last person alive, but the final witness to a civilization that reached unprecedented heights of technological achievement and global connectivity. The cities, roads, and systems that once supported billions of lives stand as monuments to human cooperation, creativity, and the complex social structures that made modern life possible. Yet without human maintenance, participation, and knowledge, these achievements begin their inevitable return to the natural processes that governed Earth long before human consciousness emerged to contemplate its own existence. The experience transforms from initial confusion through growing horror toward a strange peace with solitude that no human was ever meant to endure. In the absolute quiet of a world without voices, you carry the memory of what 8 billion human lives once accomplished together, becoming the final curator of humanity's brief but remarkable experiment in transforming a planet through intelligence, cooperation, and an endless curiosity about what might be possible when conscious beings work together toward common goals that exceed what any individual could achieve alone,